Today, we're going to talk about steps 10 and 11. The steps begin to change when you get to step 10. The first 9 steps feel like events that I'm participating in. I'm doing my 4th step. I'm doing my 5th step. I'm doing my 8th step list. I'm doing my 9th step. But when I get to step 10, the language starts changing. Step 10 says, I continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. So at step 10, the steps stop being these events I participate in and start being how I live my life. So in the big book on page 84, it says, this thought brings us to step 10, which suggests we continue to take personal inventory and continue to set right any new mistakes as we go along. We vigorously commenced this way of living as we cleaned up the past. We've entered into the world of the Spirit. Our next function is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. This is not an overnight matter. It should continue for our lifetime. Continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. When these crop up, we ask God at once to remove them. We discuss them with someone immediately and make amends quickly if we've harmed anyone. Then we resolutely turn our thoughts to someone we can help. Love and tolerance of others is our code. So in that short little couple of paragraphs, there's a lot of information about what step 10 requires. I like that it says our next function is to grow, not just maintain, but grow in understanding and effectiveness. Which begs the question, understanding of what? Any ideas what I'm supposed to grow in the understanding of? Yeah, ourselves, how I'm supposed to live, right, how to treat others. For me, this is a twofold process. The first thing I'm growing in the understanding of is the mechanics of the steps. So I'm learning how to work the steps, and I'm growing in my understanding and effectiveness at doing so. And then, as I get better at working the steps on a regular basis in my life, I begin to grow in the understanding of God's will for me and the power to carry it out. The effectiveness of carrying out and of executing the 3rd step, basically. And I like that it says this is not an overnight matter, it should continue for our lifetime. Then it says continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. That sounds like step 4 to me. That sounds like inventory. And it goes on to say, when these crop up, not if, but when they crop up, we ask God at once to remove them. That's step 6 and 7. And it says we discuss them with someone immediately. That's step 5. And make amends quickly if we've harmed anyone. That's steps 8 and 9. And then we resolutely turn our thoughts to someone we can help. That's step 12. So step 10 is step 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 12, all rolled into one, all day, every day. So I want to look at the 2 halves of the step. To start with, it says continue to take personal inventory. So I can't continue to take personal inventory if I don't know how to take personal inventory. It's why I put so much emphasis on the mechanics of the 4th step process, the mechanics of the inventory while you're here. I had done 2 4th steps and was starting to try and do a regular 10th step before I realized I didn't know how to do a 4th step. I didn't know how to do inventory. I could do the first 2 columns, and my sponsor would take that and lead me where I needed to go in step 5. Which is great because I got relief from it, but now I'm turning my will and my life over to him because if he's not there, I can't get relief without him. And so I need to learn how to work the columns of the inventory process. You know, it's the same inventory in step 4 and step 10. It's the same 5-column process. But if I don't know how to do it effectively, I won't get everything I need to get out of step 4 or step 5 or step 6 or step 7 or 8 or 9, which means I can't do 10 effectively. So I've essentially hamstrung myself on 7 of the steps. And I may stay sober for a little while, but eventually life is going to get so demanding that my lack of understanding of these tools and the lack of effectiveness at carrying them out will cause my big life to collapse on me because I don't know how to process it. I don't know how to keep up spiritually with the new stuff my life is giving me. I'm convinced this is why a lot of people relapse after 2 years or 4 years or 6 years sober. Is that they either stop working the tools altogether or they don't have a functional enough knowledge of them to make sense out of the new challenges. And so they just give up and eventually life gets overwhelming. So I'm continuing to take personal inventory. The whole point of the inventory is to get to that fifth column, because that fifth column is the exact nature of my wrongs. I can write who I'm upset with or what I'm afraid of in the first column. I can look at why in the second column. I can look at what's being affected in the third column. And then I get to look at my part in the fourth column. How did I put myself in a position to be hurt? Or what am I using this fear of these wrongs to justify? What actions am I taking that aren't effective? Then I go to the fifth column. What are the character defects that are causing my behavior? And then once I get to that fifth column, I've taken the inventory, and I get to that fifth column, and then I take what I find in the fifth column and I go into step 6. And I look at what the opposite of those defects look like. What would it look like in the specific situation I'm doing inventory on? What would it look like to have been unselfish instead of selfish? What would it look like to be God-seeking instead of self-seeking, honest instead of dishonest, etc.? Specifically, what would I look like if I were the opposite of the defects I just exhibited? Because I can't be entirely ready to have God remove something unless I know what's going to take its place. There is no vacuum. I've got to know how I'm going to be instead. And then once I have a clear vision, and I'll do this in writing, once I've really got a picture of what it looks like to be me in that situation, then I can go into step 7 and ask God to help me be that man next time. Because life happens over and over and over, and this is how I get better at it. So I've got a specific vision of how to show up next time in this event. So I'll do a quick one for you. Let me think. Who, what affects my part and the defect? Okay. Who, doctor, won't listen. I'm having procedures done on my spine. I had one done 2 weeks ago. I have another one on Friday. Procedure on Friday, there's a miscommunication between what I need to have done and what the doctor thinks I need to have done, because they haven't pulled my records from the previous doctor I work with. And I keep calling them, and I have to leave messages and they don't call me back, or they call me back at a time I can't answer. And when I do talk to them, they don't listen. And it's frustrating. This is affecting my emotional security, my ambitions, my pocketbook, and my pride a little bit. Emotional security because I'm in pain, and I would like that to be over with, and I'm afraid it's not going to be. Ambitions to just have it go well so I can be done with it. Pocketbook because if they don't listen to me, I'll have to have a third procedure, and that'll cost me more money. And pride because why don't they think enough of me to pay attention when I talk? My part is been putting off going over there and forcing them to talk to me. I've been not calling enough. And I've just been letting the fear sit. And that's self-seeking, selfish, frightened, and unrealistic. So that took a whopping 90 seconds, right? So now I've got this situation, and I know that I'm being selfish, self-seeking, frightened, and unrealistic. So then I can go into my step 6 and go, what would it look like in this situation with the doctor to be God-seeking, unselfish, courageous, and realistic? What would that man look like? That man would be diligent in getting a hold of these people and communicating to them instead of giving up. It's my well-being that's at stake, and yet I'm getting frustrated and just being angry and not doing what I need to do to make sure it gets taken care of. That man would remain calm because he knows that as long as he's connected to God, everything will be fine, even if it costs more money and takes an extra week and a second procedure. He'll be fine. They're not taking anything from me, even if they make my life a little more difficult. Getting spiritually unfit is my choice, not something they're doing to me. And once I have that vision, then I can say a little prayer and ask God to help me be that man so I'm not mad when I'm on the phone with him, so I can communicate clearly. And I sit down and make the phone call. And if they don't answer my phone call this afternoon, then I get in my car when I get off of work and I drive there. And I say a prayer in the parking lot so I'm not mad, because nothing gets less done than big, giant, 6 foot tall, 300-pound tattooed me coming in and looming at some nurse or desk person. That really makes things go well. It never does. So I can sit in my car and ask for my higher power to help me go in there and be the kind of man I need to be so that I can get done what needs to get done and help remove my fear so I can go do it. That's what a 10-step looks like, and that's why. Because this is happening whether I show up for it angry or whether I show up for it as the man God would have me be. And life happens over and over and over again. 95% of it over and over and over. And it's got to stop being best guess every time. I'm just winging it. And I can't remember why it worked last time, because I was holding my breath and closing my eyes and swinging and hoping I hit the ball. But if I can do this 10th step, 4, 5, 6, and 7, I can course correct it. I'm a guy who's not really sure there is a God who loves me. 19 years sober. I know for a fact that there's a power. I'm not sure what it is still. But what I do know is that every single time I do this, and I get into that step 7, and I ask my higher power to help me be that man, I'm able to be that man, just barely, when I couldn't in the past under my own steam. I know it works. And it allows me to show up and be the guy I need to be, and life goes better. And I get to feel better about who I am. And next time I have to talk to a doctor who's not paying attention, because that's what they do, I can remember this 6th step that I got on this inventory, and I don't have to write about it again. And I can remember the experience of showing up and doing it right, so I can do it again next time. On the things that are challenging all the time, I've got twin girls who just turned 20. And they're trying to kickstart their life and pretend and figure out that they're not still on summer vacation. But they're doing it very faultingly. Bless their hearts. And I need to be able to show up and not get frustrated with them, because I'm going to be their dad for a long time. And once again, if I get angry, we stop talking, they stop listening to me, and they need me to be able to show up. So I do this inventory, and on them, I took the 6th step I came up with and I wrote it down, I put it in my phone. So that next time I have to deal with them, I don't got to write about it. I just pull that 6th step out and read it and ask God to help me be that man. And then I go talk to him about whatever it is we need to talk about. And I do the same. I've got probably a dozen of those in my pocket right now for situations and people in my life that I can't avoid, who occasionally rub me the wrong way or push a button, oftentimes that they didn't even install. So I don't have to keep doing the inventory over and over again. I've done it. I just need to remember the 6th step so I can ask God in that moment to help me be that man for the next few minutes, so I can go get the experience of what it's like to do things differently. This isn't magic. None of this is magic. It's a very deliberate approach to figuring out what I'm doing that's not working and what it would look like to do it right. The only part that I don't understand is the nature of this power, and it doesn't matter what it is. All I know is that when I ask it to help me, I'm able to get things done that I couldn't get done on my own unaided power. So then the second part of the 10 steps says, when we were wrong, we promptly admitted it. Steps 8 and 9. So I'm learning to make amends quickly if I make a mistake. I'm also supposed to turn my thoughts to someone I can help. And this is the piece of step 10 that people miss all the time. Right? If something's upsetting me, and it's still happening, or it's happening in the future and it scares me, and no amount of inventory is going to make it not scary, I still do the writing, and I still get a vision of God's will. And I ask my higher power to be that person, but I'm not going to get a chance to be that person for a couple of days. In the interim, my job is to turn my thoughts to someone I can help. Go try and be of service to the world, because that will pull me out of self enough to not let the fear overtake me, to not let the fear and the discomfort and the worry about what's coming pull me down into spiritual malady again. That's a real central piece. And this doesn't necessarily just mean going and helping some other addict or alcoholic. Just be useful. Stop worrying about doing the next right thing, capital N, capital R, capital T, and just do the next thing right. Do what's in front of you. Hold the door for somebody. Let a car into your lane. I just literally 3 months ago, I realized it's not in fact my lane. It's just the one I'm driving in. I don't own it, so I don't need to protect it. Let them in. Who cares? Try to be useful to the people around you. Call somebody and ask how their day is going. If there's nobody at hand and you want to climb out of your own head for a minute, get them to talk about them for a few minutes. People are happy to talk about themselves. And as I listen to you talk about your day, I make a connection with you, and it pulls me out of that darkness that self starts to feel like, especially if I got fears going on. So it doesn't say, the step also doesn't say, when we were wrong, we continued to take personal inventory. It doesn't say, when everything is completely disaster and burning down around me, I take personal inventory. Or when it finally hurts so bad I can't take it, I do personal inventory. It says I continue to take personal inventory. As we start talking about step 11, I'll talk a little bit more about it, but I do inventory in advance quite frequently now, pre-inventory. If I know something's coming and it worries me, it causes me fear, I'll do inventory before the fact, so I can get a vision of God's will before the fact, so that I know what it is I'm praying for God to help me be when I get there the first time, instead of screwing it up and figuring it out for next time. And I can do that. I do it as part of my own awakening. There's an idea kicking around after Bill Wilson wrote the 12 and 12. This idea started floating around that a 10th step was a written inventory at the end of every day. But that's not what the book says. This is a real-time situation. I can't afford to wait till the end of the day. First off, because I won't remember what upset me. I'll just know that I'm spiritually unfit. But on a more granular level, think of it this way, because you all have firsthand experience with this. So I'm going along and my day's going pretty good, and then at 10 o'clock in the morning, somebody does something that pisses me off or hurts my feelings or whatever, and I get a little bit spiritually unfit. And if I don't do the inventory and process it and get my higher power involved, I'll stay spiritually unfit. And then somebody else is going to do something at 11 that wouldn't have bothered me otherwise, but it bothers me now because I start getting sticky. Stuff sticks to me that wouldn't have otherwise once I get spiritually unfit. And then somebody sends me an email at 1:30 that, oh my God, I'm going to kill him. And then I'm sitting at my desk, and the pen, I reach out for the pen, and it rolls off the back of the desk, and I just want to kill myself. And by the time I get home from work, the only thing more miserable than being around me is being me. I can't afford to wait till the end of the day to address this stuff. I need to do it as quickly as I can. The whole idea here is to shorten the time between the arrival of the problem and the arrival of the solution. And that's what this 10th step is about. It's right here, right now. What's scaring me? The book says I'm supposed to pause when agitated or doubtful, not terrified and bewildered, but agitated, doubtful, smaller. That's still fear. That's still resentment. That's still confusion. And I can pause, and when I pause, I do inventory. Now after I learned to do inventory the way we teach you guys, I spent about 9 months with one of those printed sheets in my back pocket. So that every time something upset me, every time I realized something upset me, sometimes that took 2 days, but every time I realized I had a resentment or a fear going, I'd stop, I'd pull the piece of paper out, I'd write the columns and call somebody. After I did that for 9 months, a year maybe, I stopped carrying the piece of paper and started carrying a notebook because I was using the piece of paper so I didn't have to remember the stuff in the 3rd column and the stuff in the 5th column. So I needed to force myself to actually learn those 7 basic areas of life in the 3rd column and the character defects in the 5th column. And after doing it in a notebook for 8 or 9 months or a year, I began to do it in my head a lot of the time. You have to be careful doing inventory in your head because what'll happen is you'll go, that person did this, I'm being selfish. And I skipped over the third column and I skipped over my part and I skipped the meat of things. But as long as I'm deliberate and I think my way through each of the columns, I can get to the fifth column. Most of the time the character defects are pretty obvious. What I discover in doing inventory this way is that 50% of the time, even in early sobriety, 50% of the time, by the time I got all the way to the fifth column, either the thing I was writing about had become ridiculous by putting it on paper, or when I took those character defects that I found in the fifth column into step 6, it was so obvious what a person of faith would be doing instead of what I did, that I could just ask God to help me be that person. I didn't have to call my sponsor. That means like half of the time I can turn my will of my life over to God and be free as soon as I'm willing to take 2 minutes and do the work. That's pretty good. I've been doing it this way a long time, and now 90% of the time I do the inventory in my head and I get completely free in a matter of minutes. Sometimes I'll do it in my head, then I'll find myself chewing on it an hour later when, oh, I missed something, I better do it on paper. And oftentimes after I do it on paper, I'll call somebody because I'm missing something. I'm not getting the freedom and the peace that I want. In the 12 and 12, it says, the emphasis on inventory is heavy only because many of us have never really acquired the habit of accurate self-appraisal. Once this healthy practice has been groomed, it will be so interesting and profitable that the time it takes won't be missed. For these minutes or even hours spent in self-examination are bound to make all the other hours of our day better and happier. At length, our inventories become a regular part of everyday living rather than unusual or set apart. So in addition to the written inventory, I also do the spot check every day, about 4 times a day. And what that looks like is I stop what I'm doing and I get quiet and I close my eyes. I take 3 deep breaths in through my nose and out through my mouth. And I get recentered and present in the moment. And then once I'm there, I check and see how am I doing. Am I tense and I didn't notice it? Have I got anxiety going? Because we can carry anxiety and not even know we're doing it. We've done it so long. Do I feel connected to a higher power? Do I feel like I'm in the flow of life? Or do I feel frustrated by everything that's happening around me? Become aware of how I'm doing in that moment. And then I can say a little prayer and invite my higher power in to go with me until the next time I stop and do a little spot check. So I want to do that with you right now. I want to give you some experience with it. So just get comfortable in your seat. And then I'll ask you to close your eyes and take 3 breaths with me. So get comfortable, settled. Then we're going to take a deep breath in through our nose. And hold it for a beat. And then breathe out through your mouth. Another deep breath in through your nose. Breathe all the way down into your stomach. Hold it, and breathe out through your mouth. One more deep breath in through your nose. Hold it, and then breathe out through your mouth. Sit here with your eyes closed. Listen to the sounds in the room. Feel the air on your skin. Wiggle your toes inside your shoes and ask yourself what that feels like. Then feel your body. Is it tense? Is it relaxed? Is your mind moving 100 miles an hour, or is it slow and peaceful? And you can say a little prayer and ask your higher power to come with you for the next few hours. And then open your eyes and come back into the room with me. So that took like 90 seconds. You feel different than you did before we started it? A little bit more peaceful, a little bit more present in the room. I do that as part of my own awakening in the morning. I do it around 10 o'clock after I've been working for a couple of hours. I do it before I come over here and get with you guys so that I can make sure I'm centered and I'm focused and I'm where I need to be for you. I do it when I get home before I get out of my car. Right now, these days I do it out of habit. But I was self-employed for a lot of years. I worked from home. And then about 7 years ago, I got a job working for somebody else. Right about the same time my daughters entered middle school. And I would come home from work, and my daughters would be home from school, and my wife would be home from work, and I have no idea what's going on in the house. And if I walk in there a little spiritually ragged from the day and they're in a bad mood and arguing with each other, it is not pretty for me. And if I walk into the house and they're laughing and joking and yelling and chasing each other around the house and I'm in a little bit spiritually bad spot, that'll also piss me off. But just by stopping and taking a few deep breaths, I can get recentered and I can go and walk into the house and be the man I need to be, whatever's happening. You can always do that. We had one of the women that was here a while back who got some very scary news regarding the court, and it was 5 days away. And by the second day, she was spinning so bad she wanted to leave. And we sat down and I showed her that. And I told her, every time you go from one thing to the next all day long, step aside and do 3 breaths. And I want you to do it for 1 day, and I'll talk to you about it tomorrow. And she did it all day long. And the next day I asked her how she was doing, and she said, it's amazing. That thing is still out there and it's still scary, but it's not overwhelming me anymore. And I don't feel the need to leave here and go get high. And that's working. And she just kept doing it all the way until she had to show up at court, and court went how court went. But she was free in the meantime. So that takes us to step 11, which says, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him, praying only knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. So it's prayer and meditation, not or, either or. The first piece is prayer. Prayer is an integral part of the program. It's not optional. It's something I have to do. When I got here, I had a lot of animosity towards the word God and towards anything that seemed like religion, and I was not praying. And my sponsor said, that's not okay. You're leaving out half of one of the steps, and the only way to tell how many of the steps you can leave out and the programs to keep you sober is to keep leaving bits out until you're loaded, and that was too many. And then he suggested that I go talk to this old timer at my home group, Charlie P. Charlie was 47 years sober and he still called himself an atheist. So I went to Charlie and I said, Charlie, what do you do about this prayer business? I mean, you're an atheist, you don't pray, right? And he says, well, sure I do. I said, what? I don't understand. And he said, well, the step says to pray, and I want to stay sober, so I do what it says. And once again, there was more stammering, and I went, well, but who are you praying to? And he said, it doesn't say I got to pray to anybody. It just says I got to pray. And so then we began to have a conversation, and what he showed was that if I would stop trying to find ways that this didn't fit me and start trying to find ways to make it personal, that I could find a way to make it work for me. So that's what ended up happening. For me, it's funny because I got all this animosity about God and religion, and so I end up in my first home group. There was a guy in there who liked to say, my higher power, which used to call Jesus, which made me want to run out of the room. I mean, no offense if you're a Christian, it's all awesome now, but back then it was rubbing me the wrong way. And he kept saying that. He was just trying to be a jerk. He was another newcomer like me. And then one day he said it, and that part of my brain that was trying to kill me for years, it doesn't have a job anymore, but now it just likes to pay attention to stuff and make jokes, heard him say, my higher power, whom I choose to call Jesus, and it said, my higher power, whom I choose to call dude. And I started laughing, because I'm an old skateboarder from the 70s and 80s, and I walk around talking to myself all the time going, dude, seriously? Come on, damn it, dude. And I start laughing going, I've been praying for years, I didn't even know. And at that moment, the baggage around the word prayer disappeared, and I had something that could be personal for me. Even if you're a non-believer, if you take the right attitude, you can find a way to make prayer personal for you. If you are a believer, that's awesome. You still have to find a way to make the prayer personal. Chances are you've been saying the same prayers your whole life. And this is not a box to check. I'm not saying you got to go get new prayers. I'm saying maybe it's a good idea if you get a written version of the prayers you like so that you can read the words and think about what they mean and make it personal. I read prayers and spiritual thought from all different kinds of practices. And as an example of why this can matter, I was reading the Lord's Prayer a while back. And in the reading of the prayer, I got to the part where it says, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And my whole life, when I read that, what I thought it meant was, forgive me my trespasses and I'll forgive those who trespass against me. But when I read it on this day, what it meant was, forgive me my trespasses while I forgive those who trespass against me. At the same time. And that's a completely different sentiment. Like, you forgive me, then I'll forgive them. It's not the same as, forgive me while I'm forgiving them and we'll all be forgiven together. I went, I like that better. If I hadn't been, I said that, I grew up saying that prayer. If I hadn't been reading it, the thought wouldn't have occurred. So you have to make prayer personal. And then there's meditation. Prayer and meditation, not or. People always talk about, oh, meditation probably a great idea. I don't really do it. I don't know. You know, I didn't meditate for the first year, really. I didn't think I meditated for the first year. And then I got a new sponsor who talked a lot about steps 10, 11, and 12. And I went to him and said, I can't meditate. I don't meditate. I can't meditate. I said, what are you talking about? I said, and I told him I couldn't meditate because I thought meditation was sitting cross-legged on a pillow on the floor and clearing your mind of all thoughts. And I'm a fat dude. I can't even sit cross-legged on the floor. You know, I had 4 or 5 voices in my head. Some of them weren't even me. You know, it was like, it wasn't happening. And then he told me, you realize that there are a lot of different approaches to meditation. Lots of different kinds of meditation. And I said, really? What are they? And he said, I'm not telling you. Because if I tell you, I'll become Charlie Brown's teacher in about 10 seconds. Wah, 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 and you won't listen to me anymore. But if you go do some research, you get a little bit of skin in the game, one of them will start speaking to you. I went, okay. And I went home, and I got online, which was challenging in 2000. I started looking around online, and I read about this thing called walking the labyrinth. This is a labyrinth. It's a 14th century Christian practice that was revived in the 90s by this maybe nun woman in San Francisco. And it turned out in 2000, when I was reading about it, there were 12 of these things in Austin. And when I first pictured the labyrinth, I thought it was the hedge maze from The Shining. That's totally not what it is. It's just rocks on the ground. Sometimes it's even a pattern painted in a parking lot. But my job at the time was driving around town, so I could go find them while I was at work. This one that you're looking at, that's an 85-foot circle. It's 85 feet in diameter. The white lines that you're looking at are made out of the same things that as the limestone that's lining the sidewalks out here. It's big. And you walk into it, and every turn except a couple are 180-degree turns. So there's always one shoulder facing the middle. And whichever shoulder's facing the middle, the opposite hemisphere of your brain becomes dominant. I don't know why, but science says so I believe them. So I'm walking with my right shoulder facing the middle, and my left analytical brain becomes dominant. And then I turn, and I have my left shoulder facing, and my right creative brain becomes dominant, which is great, because over the course of walking in, it evens the hemispheres out. And the arguments and the problems live in my left brain, and the creative solutions live in my right brain. And I walk all the way in, and I sit and I pray for a minute, and then I walk back out. And there are things I learn every time. Like when you first walk in, you see the little white curve up there at the top? That's where you walk in. And you walk in and you make one quick turn, and then you're right next to the center circle. I'm almost to the middle, and I haven't even started yet. And then the last thing that happens before you go to the center is you swing all the way around the outside, and you're right next to where you walked in. And then one more quick turn and you're in the middle, you're where you're headed. But just before, you're as far from it as you've ever been. These are great spiritual lessons. Every time I do it, even still, when I'm walking out, I get about halfway out, and I'm pretty zoned out at this point, and I'm just looking at the path in front of me and not even thinking. And then suddenly my head will clear up, and I'll get this little jolt, and I'll go, we've made a mistake. This isn't the way out. I go, what, did I jump into a different row without noticing? I turn around for no apparent reason. There's one path. I'm on it. I just got afraid for a minute. Also a good spiritual lesson. If you do this with other people, you go in about 1 minute apart. And it's a very circuitous route, right? And at some point, I'll be walking along, and I'll turn a corner, and you'll be standing right next to me, and we'll be walking step for step together, and it feels for all the world like we're on the path together. And 15 seconds later, you're at the far side of the circle. And I don't know if you're ahead of me on the path or behind me on the path, but there's one path and we're both on it. I loved this, and I could do this at 9 or 10 months sober. I could do it. One of the women that I sobered up with listened to house music for 10 minutes. Just boots of Jesus, like it made me I would want to kill myself. But she was an old club kid, and there was just enough going on in the music to stop her thinking about anything else, and not enough to suck her in. It worked great for her. It was personal. This is supposed to be a practical program of action. Sitting quietly and clearing my mind of thoughts wasn't practical. So I found something that was. Now I have this practice that I really love. I've been doing it a long time. And yet every time, like now, when the chronic pain returns in my back and I have to go have some more procedures, I can't do it. I can't sit and be quiet. There's too much going on in my body for that. So I will shift and do like guided meditations and things, because that's practical when I'm in this place. Now for you guys, because you don't have a lot of internet access at the moment, I've made some of these things. These little packets. They've got an article in here about the difference in Eastern and Western meditation. There's an article about walking meditation. There's another article about walking the labyrinth. And then there's an article in here describing 23 different kinds of meditation, what they involve, what they look like. So that you're welcome to take some of these. There's a stack of them over there and share them with each other. I keep reading about this stuff. I stumbled across a kind of meditation recently that it freaks me out because I think I may end up having to do it. I had the same reaction to it that I had to fasting and yoga when they were first presented, and I've had to do both of those along the way. But it's called dynamic meditation. And I don't know a lot about it because it freaked me out, so I stopped reading. But what it involves is you set a timer for 20 minutes. No music, no nothing. And as soon as the timer starts, you begin to move. No rhythm, no nothing, you just move for 20 minutes, and you experience what it's like to be in your body. It's like a seizure for 20 minutes, right? And then the timer goes off and you stop. And for 10 minutes, you feel what it feels like to be perfectly still in your body. And I'm sure there's way more to it than that, but I got about that far and went, I don't want to do that. But there's all kinds of meditation that you can make practical for you. So, in reading the 11th step in the book, it talks about on awakening. Now, this is part of the 11th step practice is becoming deliberate and intentional with my day. I used to wake up, if I had to be at work at 8 a.m. and it was a 15-minute drive, I'd set my alarm for 20 till. And then I'd wake up going, the whole rest of the day was screwed, And so I need to leave time in the morning to do what the On Awakening says. Make time for prayer, make time for meditation. Build it into my morning routine. So what does it consist of? I'm asking God, I'm starting off by saying a prayer, and asking God to direct my thinking through the day. And then I'm considering the 24 hours ahead. And for me early on, that was like, well, God, we're having a day. And then, but now it's more specific. I do the 3 breaths. And I say a little prayer and ask my higher power to direct my thinking. And then I start looking at my calendar for the day. What do I have to do today? Does any of it cause me any agitation or doubt sitting here at 6 in the morning? Like I know I have to make a phone call to this doctor this afternoon. And that worried, that agitated me a little bit because I called him once yesterday and totally blew off the second phone call. So I sat down and I wrote some inventory on it. And I have a timer set in my phone because part of my vision of God's will is to have a timer in my calendar so that as soon as I finish up with the stuff I need to do around 3:30, it'll go off and remind me, and I can go to my office and I can get quiet for a minute and say a prayer and then start calling. And if they don't answer the phone, I get in my car at 4 and drive to the office because it needs handling. I can't afford to put it off. So 6 in the morning, as I'm considering my day ahead, it's like I'm standing at the top of the hill looking for the potholes before I head down the road with my day. And trying to get this, because it's better to figure out what a man of faith looks like at 6 in the morning than it is when I'm in the middle of the thing that scares me. That's not a good time to figure out how to do it right. I need to have a vision before I get there. Like I said, I didn't think I meditated at all, but when I first got out of treatment, before I even did my 5th step, my sponsor said, go home and look at what you do every morning, and then come back and tell me what that is in a few days. So I said, okay. And I went home and I paid attention. And I came back 4 or 5 days later and said, I get up and I go to the bathroom and I shower and I get dressed and I drink coffee and smoke cigarettes and then I go to work. I do other stuff too, but I always do those things. I said, okay, now I want you to go home and start playing, trying to figure out where you can put prayer and meditation and on awakening stuff in amongst the things you already do every day, so that you won't have to remember to do it, because if you have to remember, you won't remember and it won't happen. So I said, okay. And I went home and started playing with it. And I had been hearing people in meetings say the first thing I do every morning is hit my knees and thank God for another day sober. So the first morning I got up when the alarm went off and I rolled out of bed, got on my knees, said a prayer, and woke up 20 minutes later sleeping, curled over my bed. I don't wake up that well. That was not going to be practical. And as I played with it over the next few days, what I figured out was I get up, and I start the coffee, and I go do my business in the bathroom, and I get dressed, and I come out, and I pour a cup of coffee, and I sit down. But before I drink that coffee, before I light that cigarette, I stop, and I say a little prayer, and I ask my higher power to direct my thinking. And I think about my day for a minute. What do I need to do today? Does any of it worry me? And then I light my cigarette, and I drink my coffee with no TV, no cell phone, no distractions, just me and the coffee and the cigarette. And I did that for a year and never realized it was meditation. It was just me being a little quiet for 10 minutes before I headed out into the day. There's always a way to make this practical in the morning. It may mean setting my alarm a little bit earlier, but this is not something that's just a good idea. This is part of the program of recovery. You know, do I believe I need a program of recovery? Do I believe I'm an addict? Then I'm going to find a way to make this personal for me and do it. And then there's the nightly review. I've started my day with some intention, and I've moved through the day trying to practice step 10. And then I get to the end of my day and I do my nightly review. I always say 12-step recovery is not based on a belief in God. It's based on firsthand experience with this power in my life. But if I don't review my experience, I'm not always sure what it was. And I examine my experience when I share in a meeting, when I talk to my sponsor, but I can review my experience every single day at the end of the day. What went well, what didn't? And there's the questions in the book. When we retire at night, we constructively review our day. Were we resentful, selfish, dishonest, or afraid? Do we owe an apology? Have we kept something to ourselves which should have been discussed with another person at once? Were we kind and loving towards all? What could we have done better? Were we thinking of ourselves most of the time, or what we could do for others, what we could pack into the stream of life? We must be careful not to drift into worry, remorse, or morbid reflection, for that would diminish our usefulness to others. After making our review, we ask God's forgiveness and inquire what corrective measures should be taken. A lot of people just answer those questions. For me, they're not all that helpful. You know, I can't just go through and go, was I selfish? Probably. Was I selfish? Yeah. That's not really a review. That's just a way to beat myself up when I'm tired. Have they told you guys hungry, angry, lonely, tired yet? You guys heard that? Got to watch for that stuff because it spiritually diminishes me. So if I've lived my day right, I'm tired. I got to be careful how I review the day. I love the big book, but I'm not dogmatic about the words. I'm more interested in what the meaning is. And so for me, and people kept talking about doing a written review at the end of the day, but most of them talked about it in terms of, I don't do that, but it would probably be a good idea. So if nobody's doing it on a regular basis all the time, then it may not be a practical way to approach this. So for me, I found a nightly review that I could do every single day, that I do with the lights off laying in bed. And it's 4 simple questions. I start with, where did I trust God and take the right actions today without really struggling, without even having to try? What did I do well that I didn't used to do well? Start off by giving myself credit. Second question is, where did I face doubt or indecision? And did I pause and look for an intuitive thought? Did I say a prayer and try to get my higher power involved? And if so, how did that go? What was that experience like? Third question is, where did I not realize I was making a mistake until the mistake was made? And did I back up and do some step work and make amends if necessary? And what was that experience like? And the fourth question is, where did I know what the right thing to do was and choose not to do it? And rarely is it like, I probably shouldn't have robbed that store. It's more like, I knew I should go to bed at 11, but I stayed up and watched one more episode till midnight. Then it made it really hard to get up when the alarm went off. And the whole next morning was a little rough. Or I knew I shouldn't have eaten the whole pint of ice cream. Or, dumb little stuff, right? But eventually, the consequences of those actions will get me to a place where I'm ready to try something different. Even if I made a bad mistake today, if I did the step work on it and I made the amends that were necessary, that's not a law. That's not a lose, that's a win. Everybody makes mistakes. Our problem wasn't that we made mistakes, it's that we refused to admit we had made them and we never cleaned up our messes. So if I can learn from that, not only can I avoid the mistake next time, but now I get to know that I'm the kind of person who does the step work and cleans up my mess. That's a good thing to know when I'm tired. And then there's promises at the end of the 11th step. What used to be the hunch or the occasional inspiration gradually becomes a working part of the mind. Being still inexperienced and having just made conscious contact with God, it's not probable that we're going to be inspired at all times. We may pay for this presumption in all sorts of absurd actions and ideas. Nevertheless, we find that our thinking will, as time passes, be more and more on the plane of inspiration. We come to rely upon it. But this 10 and 11, keeping my side of the street clean in 10, and gradually changing the course of my behavior by doing the inventory. And then working through prayer and meditation to increase my connection to this power that allows my thinking to be less selfish and self-centered and dishonest and fear-based. The better my connection is, the less defects show up. This is a daily practice. It just gets better and better with time. So I have to learn how to lean into it. This is where a lot of people fail. There are a lot of people out there who, they go to treatment and they work the steps once, and then they hang out with a lot of sober people, and they go to a lot of meetings, and they pray once in a while. And when life gets hard, they sort of hold their spiritual breath and hope they make it through. But that's not spiritual growth, that's endurance. And one of these days, life's going to make you hold your breath for 5 minutes longer than you can, and you may end up loaded again. And in the meantime, you'll stay afraid, because I'm not outgrowing fear. I'm just learning how to endure. But that's not what the program is here for, and that's not what I have to do if I'm willing to do a few simple things on a regular daily basis. That's all we got for today, guys.